Wow, what a week at the White House. Seriously, it was a packed one. We saw just a flood of announcements, executive orders, and new policies. So today we're going to cut through all that noise and break down what these really rapid-fire changes actually mean for the country.
You know, when you have this many policy announcements dropping this fast, it's really easy to lose the thread. So how do all these different pieces actually fit together? Well, that is the big question we're going to tackle today as we map out this entire week of action.
So here's our game plan. We've organized the week splits into 4 main areas. We're going to start with national security, then see how that theme gets used to justify a huge push in American energy. After that, we'll pivot to some pretty sweeping changes in healthcare, and then wrap things up with what the White House is calling a new wave of domestic manufacturing.
Okay, let's kick things off with national security. A number of key actions this week were really zeroed in on strengthening the country's defense and intelligence capabilities.
So, right out of the gate, the week started with a pretty big one. The extension of a very controversial law, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA as you probably know it. This gives the U.S. government really broad authority to spy on foreign targets, and it's a tool that's been at the center of a huge debate about security versus privacy for a long time. And then, things got interesting. We saw the administration make a very direct trade-off between environmental rules and military readiness. A presidential determination was signed that basically exempts Air Force pilot training in the Northwest from some Clean Water Act regulations for a year. The White House is framing this as cutting red tape, removing, quote, unnecessary obstacles to make sure pilots are combat ready.
And that whole idea of national security, well, it bleeds right into our second big topic, American energy. The administration actually declared a national energy emergency, and that one move unlocked a really powerful tool to reshape the entire energy sector.
Now, to really get what's happening here, you have to understand this thing called the Defense Production Act, or DPA. This act gives the president some pretty extraordinary powers to basically direct private companies to support the national defense. And in this case, the administration just declared that huge parts of our energy sector are now, officially, essential to the national defense.
And believe me when I say this was a broad action, I mean broad. The president used the DPA in 5 separate memos, targeting everything you see on this list, from coal and oil, all the way to the electrical grid itself. It's a massive federal intervention, all designed to ramp up domestic energy production.
And if you want to understand the thinking behind it, just look at this direct quote from the memo on coal. The argument they're making is that stable, coal-fired power is absolutely essential for national defense, that it powers everything from military bases to AI data centers. And this same logic was then applied to all 5 of those energy sectors.
All right, let's pivot. The third major pillar of the week's policy push was American healthcare. And here we saw 2 huge announcements, one aiming to bring down prescription drug costs and another that represents a pretty historic shift in how we approach mental health treatment.
So first up, let's talk drug prices. The White House announced its 17th Most Favored Nation deal. The idea behind this model is to make sure the U.S. doesn't pay more for a drug than other developed countries. This latest deal is with the manufacturer Regeneron, and it means the price of the cholesterol drug Proluent gets cut by more than half if you buy it through the new Trump RX program.
But it wasn't just about the price drop. Here's the other side of that coin. In return for the deal, Regeneron committed to investing this staggering amount, $27 billion, back into its operations here in the U.S. by 2029. And the White House is pointing to this as a huge win for bringing drug manufacturing back home. Okay, now for the other big healthcare story. And honestly, this one could be a real game changer. An executive order was signed to fast-track research and access to psychedelic therapies. We're talking things like ibogaine and psilocybin as potential treatments for serious mental illness, with a huge focus on helping our nation's veterans.
So what does this order actually do? Well, it's kind of like a 5-pronged attack on the problem. As you can see, it pushes the FDA to speed up its reviews, and it gives patients a right to try these drugs. It puts real money on the table, $50 million for state research, and it forces agencies like the VA and HHS to finally share their clinical data. And maybe most importantly, it tells the Attorney General to get ready to quickly reclassify these drugs if the trials prove they work.
And if you're wondering why there's such a sense of urgency here, this number really puts it all into perspective. It was cited right in the White House fact sheet. For more than 2 decades, over 6,000 veterans have taken their own lives every single year. The administration is framing this EO as a new path forward, a new source of hope for this group in particular.
And this move got praise from a really wide and diverse coalition of advocates. This quote from former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who's become a major proponent of this, really captures that feeling. He, and a lot of other people, are calling this a long overdue, historic moment for veterans' healthcare.
All right, let's move on to our final big theme for the week. A whole series of announcements centered around what the White House is calling a reshoring wave of investment coming back into American manufacturing. So the administration is kind of setting the stage for all this news with some positive economic data. They're pointing to the Institute for Supply Management's Manufacturing Index, which is a really key indicator of the sector's health, and noting that it's shown growth for 3 straight months. You can see on the chart right here, it's at its highest point since 2022.
And building on that positive backdrop, they highlighted some absolutely massive corporate investment commitments. First up was Apple, pledging a whopping $600 billion over the next 4 years to its manufacturing partners here in the U.S., an investment they say will create 20,000 new jobs.
And then there was NVIDIA, which, as you know, is at the heart of the whole AI revolution. The company pledged $500 billion to produce its advanced AI chips and all the related infrastructure completely on U.S. soil. That's a huge deal for this kind of cutting-edge technology.
And the announcements just kept coming. The White House press release also listed off a whole wave of other huge investments across key industries. You've got big pharma like J&J and AstraZeneca, plus major players in the auto and steel sectors. The message here is clear. This is a broad trend of reinvestment in American manufacturing.
And to really put a button on all this economic news, the White House made sure to prominently feature this very powerful quote from NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, who gave direct credit to the president for creating the climate that made this surge in domestic investment possible.
So let's just take a breath and recap here. In just 1 week, we saw major policy pushes on national security and military readiness, a massive intervention in the energy sector, landmark moves on both drug prices and mental health, and a whole lot of big news about major investments in U.S. manufacturing.
And that really brings us full circle, right back to our opening question. When you see this much policy, this much variety pushed through in just a handful of days, what does that tell you about an administration's strategy, about its core priorities? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.